organization, have you ever fallen into the trap of one-way marketing? Meaning you're communicating but not listening? As a consumer, have you ever been overwhelmed by everything that's coming at you, digitally, online, within the marketing space? My next guest is Chief Listening Officer at the One Group Agency. His name is Matt Borck, and he has a lot of very interesting things to say about his approach to marketing. It's listener-led, it's empathy-driven. I'm proud to introduce my next guest, Matt Borck, on Rachel Thexton Connects. Okay, so today's an exciting day. What I've really loved about the podcast is being able to connect with professionals that I otherwise would not have been able to connect with. Individuals who are bright, talented, have perspectives that make me rethink the way that I'm thinking. And I think that's what we all need. I'm thrilled to welcome today to the podcast, Matt Borck. He's partner and chief listening officer at the One Group Agency. Matt, thank you for joining me today. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So Matt and I connected on LinkedIn, and he's doing some really interesting work. I think his title, Chief Listening Officer, kind of indicates the type of work that he does and the approach that he takes to that work. As I read through your bio, Matt, and we connected, I kept seeing these consistencies in the way in which you were describing your work. Consistencies with how I run my PR business and also how I approach the podcast, such as, connection, authenticity, storytelling. And so that really got my interest, really piqued my interest. So, before we dive into more about who you are, can you, is there a way that you can tell us kind of your kind of shorter or elevator pitch on how you approach marketing differently as a chief listening officer?
That's awesome. So first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute honor. I've loved the content that you've been putting out. And I love even that you found some similarities in what you do with what I do. And even talking to you before we went live, I think that also is similarities in who we are just as human beings and values and character. And so it is interesting, like being a chief listening officer and what that means. And it's amazing how much that stands out to people. And to put it simply, like most marketers focus on what to say, but my role is about using empathy-driven listening and focusing on what people like, what to hear. And listening to me isn't passive. It's an active practice that shapes content. It shapes brand strategy, relationships. And so that title kind of, to me, sort of authentically reflects my commitment to understanding before creating. That would be doing my very, very best to work with brands, to work desperately. I feel like we owe it to target audiences to understand them so intimately that we're not adding noise to their already crazy lives, but we're able to cut through it by adding value to them and decoding those, or maybe even the word is interpreting those audience signals like the silence or engagement or an engagement shift or even what an emoji might mean, so that we don't just post more, but we post smarter. And I think that to me, traditional marketing has always been transactional. It's something that's always very frustrated me about the marketing industry. It was shouting messages, chasing quick wins, relying on vanity metrics. And it hasn't worked, right? Using fear, using manipulation. And if we're using any of those things, to me, I believe that we're doing it wrong. That's just my own personal take on it. And so my approach has always been relational. It's about deep, empathetic listening. And that word, you'll hear me talk about it a lot because it's powerful and there's a lot of meaning behind that, but understanding what's behind an audience's behavior. And then building trust over time. It shouldn't feel like it's a one-way megaphone. It should feel like it's a genuine conversation, because ultimately what we want to do is build real relationships. That's what we're all after, is building those real relationships. It's as if I built a relationship with you, like even today, like listening to you and getting a chance to hear you speak about your family and what matters. I could see it in your eyes instantly. I could see it in your body language and the way that you shifted. I know what it means to you. And that's why I showed you, it actually gave me shivers, because I was listening to the impact of what your family, who you love, it has on even your physical body. And so I'm trying desperately to ask the why are these things important? And then before I react, getting to really understand who you are. So I would add content to your life that adds value. So when you see it, I want to see this. I want to engage with this. And then if you purchase once, it doesn't matter if I don't see you for 2 years, because we built this connection. I know in 2 years, you're going to go, when it's time to get something else, you're coming back because we've built that relationship. So That's sort of a lengthy description as summarizing my title, but also kind of traditional marketing versus our approach at One Group Agency.
That's, all of that sounds like a no-brainer. Like, you're in a, let's say you're on a call speaking with a potential client or in a boardroom, wherever you may be. But in my work with corporate consumer clients, for the most part, I've found that sometimes there's this resistance to doing things differently, especially when it comes to really getting outside of the triangle. Outside the box is kind of, I'm not a fan of that term, and a lot of resistance to that. How have you found that potential clients, have responded to this concept or idea of approaching marketing in this different way?
That, even you just sharing that makes me ask why. And so ultimately, like, I've been in that room, and I appreciate you even sharing that, because I'd ask you why, like in those situations, why would there be resistance? And then maybe, and that's something that my daughters have taught me. My wife, who's the most incredible listener in the world, has taught me everything that I am today as a human being, and what I also do is because of them. And every day they challenge me to listen and to not be okay with just not asking why. They keep asking why. So that's the first thing. And I think that what I tend to do is, in those situations when I'm meeting with them, is ask for permission if it's okay if I ask why, because it may make them feel a little uncomfortable. But ultimately, some of the most hardest conversations that we'll have, or even uncomfortable conversations, are the ones that we grow the most from. So if there's a bit of, I'm not even sure what the word would be, but if there's a bit of a pushback, a lot of times that's also too, like, if we're expecting something and we're not getting it, we'd be foolish to keep doing the same thing. So I think when we're working with businesses, a lot of times they want to portray that they are something. And it's the interesting thing is that you then have to be that for the rest of your time with your audience, because if you've portrayed something you genuinely aren't, then you have to keep that up, which in my opinion is a huge struggle, because I can't do that as a human being, but businesses try to do that. And then the other thing that I've learned from this exact scenario that I'm talking about with you is that our audiences are way smarter. So they know when you're portraying something that you aren't. So if I was to meet you, like right now, you've been amazing in this conversation and prior to even coming on live, like on air. But if I met you for coffee, I would expect you're going to be that same loving human being who cares for her family, all of the things that you were able to share with me in that little bit of a moment. But if you're not, it's going to make me second guess who you are and what you told me, and think, was she lying to me? Was she just telling me what she felt that I needed to hear just to make the sale?
Right.
And our audiences are, and that's why I think that power of asking that question that children innocently ask, why? And then from that response that I would hear from those businesses, then sometimes there is a nervousness to try something new because they've always done it a certain way. Or it is a culture thing where it's like, listen, like the culture here is we need to just sell, 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 sell. We're not about building relationships. And it's like, well, then don't, if that's the case, which happens a lot, then that there's just so much power in asking the question, why?
Yeah, I think that is something I'd like to incorporate, and it would be something that I guess you do have to kind of set the stage for, because I think people would be kind of taken aback sometimes when they hear the why.
Yeah.
They probably don't know the answer often.
Yeah, especially if they have, like, it's interesting because when you have children, as you know, it's all the time that you hear
Yeah.
that. Like when I come home and my daughter's like, how's your day, Dad? And I'm like, oh, it's a bit. And I take a breath. And right away, when I take that breath, they catch me every time and they know. So what's that breath mean? Because they know that that breath says a lot more than any words that I'll follow up. And if I go, oh, you know what, don't worry about it, it's okay. They'll be like, no, 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 Dad. Why are you feeling like that? And that has taught me so much to then, there's a few things like to the depth of asking why, but you need to save space for the answer and create a safe environment for that. So in a business world, it does look at, okay, well, what are we trying to accomplish? If we're trying to accomplish connecting with an audience in an authentic way, that a lot of times we go that people will say that quote unquote, it feels authentic. Well, it shouldn't just feel authentic. It should be authentic. So that's why I really do think you're right. Like it is a nerve wracking thing. There's a lot of people that we do live our lives portraying certain things. From everything that we drive to the way that portray ourselves on social media to you name it. But ultimately, like the weight comes off when you're able just to be who you are. And that's why, we've heard it time and time again. People talk about, there's a quote that says, people do not want to do business with brands. They want to do business with humans. And so that's one of the things that I love at like One Group Agency is focusing desperately on humanizing brands. And that's something that came about because target audiences were asking for that.
Okay. Matt, has this always been this kind of curiosity about learning about others, approaching engagement with others differently. Has that always been a part of who you are? Tell me a bit about kind of growing up, what you studied, and if marketing was always in your plans for a career path for you.
So apparently, as a child, I was a storyteller. I told stories all the time. In fact, my mom and my dad will tell me things about how they'd ask me, like, okay, Matt, just before you keep going, is this a real story or is this one that you're making up? And then I started singing at a very, very early age. Like, I grew up in a family that was church going family. I was standing on a stage at 5 years old, whether I liked it or not, singing in front of hundreds of people and nervous but what it did was, like, I grew up in that family and they loved me like crazy, but it was only till I met my wife, and I met her when she was in grade 6. Okay, we didn't get married in grade 6, but I met my wife when she was in grade 6. I was in
Wow.
grade 8. We started dating when I was 17 and she was 15. But what it was about her that was magical is I grew up in a family that the communication style that we knew was just yelling and being loud. And it was all about kind of blasting what you wanted to say. It wasn't necessarily listening at all to what they were saying. It was just blasting what you wanted to say. And I just thought that's what communication was till I met my wife. And all of a sudden, she taught me about deep empathetic listening. She listened so intently. It was everything beyond the words. It was your body language. It was your breath. It was like, even like seeing what your pulse was doing. Like, it's phenomenal. Like and so it was such a contrast. And I was absolutely curious. I've always been a naturally curious human being. And so the curiosity in me just made me really want to kind of learn more. And so moving forward, then I also toured as a musician for a very, very long time. And when I'd be on tour, I was constantly taking courses and learning as much as I could and wanting to understand about how to connect with people. And that I realized that real listening was incredibly rare. And so marketing actually wasn't my first love. I would actually say that storytelling was my first love. So everything from filmmaking to making content creation, my passion was always about understanding and telling stories that mattered, added value, that connected with people on a deep emotional level, that let them know I'm not shouting at you. I've actually taken the time, I've saved the space, and I've made the time to get to know who you are, everything about who you are, so that when I create the content for you, it's almost like you've told me what to create. You've said, this is where I'm at in life. This is what matters to me. This is what adds value. And so that's what I love, being able to utilize this power of storytelling. So again, that's sort of a short little summary of growing up, meeting my wife at 15 and 17. So she's been my best friend. And she would still, like, to this day, if she wasn't my partner, my wife, she's the most phenomenal human being I've ever met. Everything that I am, everything that I do is all, she's taught me everything. And so I feel like that's something that, like, being able to bring that in, like, again, being naturally curious, I've taken many, many courses then as well. And while I'd be on tour, I'd be taking courses in marketing. I'd be taking courses learning about neuroscience, learning about trauma, learning about psychology, learning about all of these things, because I started to realize there was a common thread, and that's we all have hearts, minds, souls. We all have brains. It would be foolish to not understand those things, because ultimately there's a few anomalies when it comes to our brains, but they all kind of work the same way. You start to realize that, like, marketing should feel like a friend speaking with you and offering, like, real value, not an ad screaming for your attention and just being noise.
Yeah. Yeah. The psychology piece is really interesting. I always discuss with my husband and others just the incredible power of the brain and how little we know about it compared to other elements of the human body. And just it baffles me that it hasn't been a priority until, crisis comes,
Mm-hmm.
which is, mental health, substance use challenges and things like that. Then all of a sudden people are much more interested in the brain, right? So it's the psychology connection is definitely a fascinating one.
Mm-hmm.
In your bio that you sent me, there is a quote that I was quite interested in. People don't want to do business with brands. They want to do business with humans. And if we can help businesses build real, long lasting relationships instead of just another forgettable ad campaign, then we've done our job right.
Mm-hmm.
So, what do you mean by this? And what I really want to know, Matt, is how do you help clients to build these authentic connections that are truly authentic and not just described as authentic?
Yeah, I think, the interesting thing to me is that people don't trust brands. Like, they've made that very, very clear, but they trust people. And so how do we then help build those relationships with their target audiences? By showing up authentically. And I think one of the things that we do is we listen first. So when we meet with clients and we talk to them about their goals and what they would like to achieve, then ultimately it's about creating, a majority of times it's that relationship. right? Like, and so relationships, if I was to get a chance to meet with you, I would ask if possibly you want to like go for coffee. And then my first initial thought would be to seek to understand rather than be understood. So to spend time listening. And then if I'm intently listening, and again, I'm going to like go back to like even target audiences. Is when I talk about target audience, just to bring a bit of clarity to that, I'm not meaning general target audiences. A lot of times what people will do is they'll plunk in into some form of AI, tell me about who my target audience is, and it'll spit back a generic. Sometimes they're incredibly detailed, but in my opinion, it's a little bit more generic. And I'm talking about micro targeted audiences. So even you and getting a chance to understand where you're at, you may be a part of my target audience, but you even sharing just that tiny little bit about your family and all of those things, well, that would be different than somebody else that's in my same target audience, same age, same everything, but they're not dealing with that in their family. And so it would be two different types of pieces of content that I would create. But if I just generalize and put you into a huge group, then I'm, when we speak with everyone, we speak to no one. And so ultimately, again, as I shared earlier, like marketing, it should feel like a friend that's offering real value, because that's what we want to be. We want to create these relationships. Instead of just pushing sales content, we want to show up in conversations that their audiences are already having. And so that to me looks like going to where they're active, finding out where our micro segmented target audiences are active, and then listening. And then from there, asking what we've already been talking about, which is why. So if we even just go look at our audience and maybe they're being active on, say, a competitor of ours and say, okay, well, why are they commenting? And listen. Why are they not commenting? And listen. Why are they not engaging? And listen. And why are they engaging? What is their emoji saying? I mean, even just learning more and more, I've been taking some stuff on emoji analysis and understanding the difference between emojis and why people use them. Apple, I just noticed, did an ad campaign where they're using it to fill in words, their own emojis. People are doing it. And these things say a lot. They say absolutely a lot about what it means and where people are at and that little subtle shift in things. And so I think that to me, the brands that are actively listening to their target audiences are the ones that are and adapting to what they hear, and then utilizing AI as also an assistant to help with that. I think they're the ones that are actually going to stand out. They're going to kind of rise to the top because they deeply care about their audience.
Emoji analysis. Never considered that. So interesting. But, there's obviously a motivation behind something
Yeah.
that everything that someone does.
It's totally true. Hey, and you don't realize how emojis, like at first everyone thought they're kind of just funny. But interestingly enough, it's like sometimes there's a sentiment that's said, or like prime example, I'm going to give you one when we have a target audience of new mothers, let's say. And like we all know, like if you've had children, you have kids, that like it's the hardest job in the world. Absolutely the hardest job in the world. So at night, when say you get that little bit of a moment where your child goes to bed and maybe they're even beside you in the crib and like you literally are looking at your phone under the sheets, you don't want them to wake up from the light. So it's on mute and you want to say something, you want to engage, but you don't really want to spend the time texting, you may leave an emoji, and it means a lot. So we have to then utilize, like, hear what, like, listen, okay, what am I hearing from this? What would that potentially mean? And then like even take it back to AI and say, listen, I know that we figured out this target, micro targeted like segment of our buyer persona here, like together on AI, but I might be missing something. Right? And I need you to understand that I may have a bias. I may not have children, so I may not understand what it means to be under the sheets. Or like I remember myself, I'd be walking into a room with our little one and I'd be holding my breast so tight that when I'd finally lay down, I realized my body, I was just holding everything because I didn't want her to hear me and I didn't want her to wake up. Well, those things say something. So acknowledging that into a tool like AI that already has figured out a bit of maybe your target audience, but you're hearing these things, that helps you to actively say, I'm listening to my target audience, but I'm showing you in the way that I'm going to then create content for you. So maybe then it's going to be not about the content being, I'm just going to add captions to a video because I know you're going to have it on mute. That alone says so
Right.
much that target audience, right?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. My husband actually, I was asking him the other day, he does video work, and was asking him why he was incorporating captions into one of our videos. I think it was for the podcast or for the business. And he said, because I think this video, most people are going to be watching it during their commute and they're not going to be necessarily listening or being able to hear it all, the
Mm-hmm.
loud sound of the train or
Yeah.
whatever it may be. So all these considerations that are there are, yeah, it's very smart. It leads into social media management, which, I know we both do work in this area, probably different from a different approach in a different way. But I always found, especially now, I find social media management and that description, and it's very overwhelming. There's
Mm-hmm.
so much content online. and so many options as to where you are and how you're there and what you're doing while you're there. How do you approach working with clients on social media, with engagement strategies and content creation, with helping them to meet marketing goals at a time when like it's impossible to make your way through the clutter, it feels sometimes.
Yeah.
What is your approach with social media management when it comes to client services?
We have an amazing team at the agency, like absolutely unbelievable team. And I think it starts again by listening. So asking, what are the goals? And then working backwards, and then also what would be potential roadblocks to getting to those goals, and understanding those things as well. And I think that that's a lot of times, again, with our target audience being micro segmented, really focusing on micro segmented, you're able to then, like, I can't shout it enough, but it's like when you speak to everyone, you speak to nobody. And that's something that we've learned historically over time with watching massive campaigns flop because they tried to go, we have a giant budget, let's just try to talk to everybody. And then it talks to nobody. And understanding that, like, engagement's not about algorithms, right? It's about resonance. And like AI and analytics are like brilliant. I use them every single day and they help so much, but that human insight needs to be added to really truly help drive that real connection. So being able to come alongside the brands, listen to them, what their goals are and how we can help to achieve those, and then understanding what that would look like for their target audience. Because again, what we want to do is create that real relationship. We don't want it, if we're doing it and people are feeling like, oh, you've just figured out a sneaky way to sell to me, we're doing it wrong. Right. And the reason for that is because we know as people that it's much harder to get new clients than it is to retain. But we forget about that. And a lot of times when there is those added pressures, as I said before, where it's like, come on, we need you to put out content faster, 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 faster. I would ask why. And the interesting thing is a lot of times it comes back to a work culture. And then we've got a bigger something that we need to talk about. Right. Like, in fact, sometimes I've often thought like you need a psychologist more than you need a marketing team to come in, because there's stuff going on in the culture. And then if I'm feeling that pressure of myself, just hearing from the team, feeling like, well, they're telling us we just need to create, like, the person that's going to suffer is the target audience. And so the brands that stand out to me are the ones that actively listen and they adapt to what their audience actually cares about. Maybe not just using AI to be fast and only hitting the mark 60% of the time. Like, that's one of the things that I do here is it's like, well, you know what, we're able to utilize AI, and then we like to mask things in words like data, right? Testing, all of those things. And it's like, well, okay, but ultimately, like, I own a business and you too as well. So when I hear those things, I think, oh my goodness, I'm spending money to get results back. So let's say it's like, hey, listen, we're going to run something for 6 weeks and then we're going to see what the data says. It's like, okay, but I'm paying for that. Like, is there any way that you might be able just to listen and then tell me what's going to work prior to spending the money? So I often think, like, with all of our clients, it doesn't matter whether it's a corporate client down to a small, even a micro business or a large business. Like, I feel like we owe it to them as a part of their team to represent them and to make sure that we're desperately making the space and time to go actively understand their target audience. So if AI is making us 60% faster, and I'll throw that out there because I read that as a number, people say, oh, it's making me 60% faster. I was like, well, then that other 40%, you really have no excuse anymore than to actually go listen as a human being to these little areas. And what if it goes from 60% to 65? As a business, I'll take a 5% growth. Like, that's awesome. And I think we need to really understand that aspect of, cutting through the noise and social media strategies, and realizing that, like, I've come up and I've failed many times, or I've come up with, I'm an overthinker and I love data and I love diving deep and I love asking questions and I love to find out as much as possible. Again, being just a curious person, but sometimes I can overdo it instead of just because I'm like, this is just a great strategy, realizing that ultimately, again, going back to the analogy of, say, the mom, like, really ultimately I just needed to add captions, right? Like, and if I was properly listening, then I would have put it into action. I think that's where, as an agency, I love that our team is so good and they teach me every single day. I feel honored to work with them, that they catch things that I didn't, because I might be so enveloped in, yeah, but this is a great strategy. They're like, but what about that? And you're like, yes. Like, and that's why even just being open to that, I love that our team feels the freedom to be open to those things, because it teaches me a lot every day.
What about the visual? I know that it comes to, communicating and understanding, visuals are obviously a huge focus right now due to, again, that overabundance of information. And
Yeah.
sometimes a simple visual can be quite powerful. How do you kind of leverage the videography and visual work that you do in your storytelling? And what do you think kind of makes the most powerful impact?
Video isn't about production value, it's about storytelling. And so I say that though, in understanding that there are some clients that we have as well. And I think that everybody even listening is going to have but they want the video production. And that is absolutely fine. But ultimately, storytelling first, understanding your target audience, and then working backwards from there. So I think like some of the biggest mistakes that I see brands make sometimes with their like video would be they don't listen first. Obviously, I've been talking about that a lot, but they don't listen first. Then they overproduce, right? They'll definitely do like they're way more focused on polished, but that polished means that there's a little bit of a disconnect sometimes. And then I think that's because maybe they forget the audience. So they forget that they're talking at them, not with them. They're not adding value to their lives. Nobody loves being in a conversation where someone is talking at them. I can't handle it. We feel it when we see that video content, which is why we keep on moving and we swipe on. But when someone actually talks with us, it's just an unbelievable feeling because you feel like you're having a conversation. And then the last thing I think that like I would say probably for brands that make mistakes with video and production and all this stuff is that they make the content about themselves, not their audience. They're the hero and they're not. And I think that like when brands keep things authentic, they keep things real and relevant, people connect with that honest storytelling over polished perfection any day. And that's coming from somebody who loves video production and making things look beautiful. But I've learned my lesson. And I've learned my lesson that there is a place for really beautiful, polished work. And then there's also a place for not. And it's amazing how I've made those mistakes. And so I share that in the sense that I may have one audience that wants to just see something relevant to them that's shot on an iPhone. And that's the impact in the story right there. Cause they're going, that's me. How did they know that about me? In fact, if we've done empathetic listening correctly, when we create, it's almost like our target audience tells us the kind of content they want to see. So we create that content for them. And there's nothing better than your audience saying, how did they know that that's what I needed to see? And that's like unbelievable. But then I say that as well, because say we're working with a resort that's a beautiful resort and they want to share this like dream of going away and this beautiful beaches and all that stuff. And so that's where production value coming in and sharing that like epic cinematic story. It is absolutely essential because it's an aspirational thing. It's a dream people want and people are saving up. So we owe it to them because I want them to know we understand you're saving your money to go spend it at this resort. So we want, it's worth it. And we hear you and we are going to make this magical from the first piece of content you see. It's going to continue to your experience there.
When you're talking about the production value, it makes me think of, we were looking on some of the trends with film and visuals and noticing that right now some of the most expensive cameras to buy on Facebook Market are these, Canons from like the 90s and the early 2000s because people are liking this visual and younger demographics especially, they think it's so cool to see a photo that's time stamped and date stamped, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like how we used to see them, and they've never seen this and they think it's pretty cool, kind of like vinyls or Polaroids. It's becoming this kind of a little bit blurry type of view of the scene is kind of becoming more of a not that polished perfectionism like you're talking about, is kind of making the story a little bit real, maybe more raw to them.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because my daughter brought something up and it was about a photo and like how she loved it. But she didn't ask me at all what the camera was at all. She just loved the photo because it meant something to her and spoke to her. And she was like, this is awesome. That always stuck with me because it made me realize that when I look at the things that have really impacted my life or the things that speak to me when it comes to content, whether any piece of content that's created, I never really think, I wonder what that was shot on. And I actually shoot on fantastic, like high-end cameras.
Right.
It's all about that story and that like it speaks to me. And I think that that's something that's always important to ask. And so again, asking that question of when someone's like, well, I think it needs to be really high production value. It's okay to say, well, how come? And if they have a great answer, awesome, let's do it then. But ultimately I'd say, is it you asking? And you just want it to look that way, or is your audience actually asking? And that's sometimes you get two different answers and then you got to make your choice from there.
Yeah. It's very easy to get caught up, like you say, in kind of the way things have been done and a corporate or a culture that may be either resistant to change or may have kind of an element of dysfunction in it. And I don't say that in a judgmental way, because we all go through and we all have these elements of dysfunction that we work
Yeah.
through. But I think that kind of holds companies back sometimes when it comes to, being creative and actually doing things effectively.
Yeah. Yeah. It's important to think our role as a brand, as a business, in the lives of our audience. And is it that we're the hero, we're awesome, and they would be fortunate to be in our lives? Not in my opinion. I honestly feel honored to be in their life. And so that's why I feel like we owe it to them to understand them, so that we realize if production is one of the aspects that is important to them, then I want to give it to them. And I'm willing to let my ego, I know I'm not cool, so I don't worry about that, but it's hard when egos do get involved, because then that's a different one. That's a challenge as well, especially what we're talking about earlier about where we may want to portray something that we're not. And then I would ask, well, here's the thing. If you start portraying that, you have to be that always. That's a hard thing to maintain. Whether that's a human or a business, it's a very, very, you would know that it's a very, very difficult thing to maintain.
Mm-hmm. It's like telling a lie and then sticking to it, right?
Yeah.
It never works. It crumbles at some point. I want to talk for a minute about diversity. When we look at the statistics and just look at the layout of British Columbia, of who we are as humans, you and I assume you're born here in Canada. We're really more of the minority. There's just such a beautiful collection of humans here in BC. We're so diverse and across the country. And that means different values, different traditions, interests, motivations, things that might make offense, things that, might be more intriguing.
Mm-hmm.
How do you consider diversity and incorporating that into marketing when you're working with clients?
This is an unbelievable question. My answer is curiosity. Like, definite leading with empathy and curiosity. And I think when we lead with those things, we want to understand and get to know them. And I feel blessed that I have had the opportunity. I love living in British Columbia. I think it's one of the most greatest places to live in the world. And I love the idea of the diversity. It's incredible, and the inclusivity. And so when we lead, again, flogging the word listen, but when we listen first, it says everything. That action alone, because again, I'm talking about it being active, not just passive. So when we listen and we seek to understand, it means that we're truly wanting to get to know someone, to get to know a community, to get to know a culture. And marketing isn't a one size fits all. It just isn't. Different communities require different approaches. And I think that when you approach it utilizing empathy, it matters, right? Like, cultural intelligence matters. And so listen to them, understand values, understand language, nuances like that make the difference between connection and misalignment. It's amazing. Like, I'll share with you, like, I've had the blessing of working with the Indigenous community for many different projects. And for years, my wife and I had the honor of being the official photographers for the Four Host First Nations pavilion when the Olympics were on. And the relationships that we built from there were phenomenal. And what we learned about listening and actively listening every minute of every day, because it would be amazing how one moment we were allowed to take, say, photos and tell the story of something that was so beautiful. That was a ceremony that was happening. And literally the next second, we were not at that same part of that ceremony. We were not allowed to, because culturally, where this other Indigenous community came from, they don't allow pictures. And we were called to take those pictures with authenticity, to share through imagery what we felt, smelt, sensed, heard. Our heart rates increased. They didn't, like, everything. We were doing it through imagery, and being very aware of what was going on taught us so much about how we actively then would listen and ask for permission. Is it okay if we take photos at this point? And we started building that relationship where we'd even just get a look and we knew, okay, it's okay to take photos. And that stuck with me, because it allowed us to take that into other, like, we're working on a project right now where there's translations that are going to be needed for 4 different languages that are all here in one community in a little area in British Columbia. And I love that it's 4 different languages. And so even understanding, I got a text last night that was saying, just remember that it's written from right to left. And I thought, this is unbelievable, because I care about the audience. I want them to know we want to meet them where they're at. We hear them and we want them to know that. So even just being curious and getting reminders of it's written right to left, the little things like that just show you, I just want people to know that we care, that we lead with empathy. And I think that that's something that, to me, like, when we tailor messaging beyond just demographics. We look at like micro communities and how they engage with content. And I even talk about like what we talked about earlier, like I look at psychographics and neuroscience and anything else that just helps me to deeply understand who they are, not just what they do. I think that act alone, and it allows for better engagement and better strategies and better communication and better connection. And then also I'm going to lead with being okay to be like, to have compassion for yourself, where sometimes I might not, like I've not wanted to say something sometimes because I don't want to say the wrong thing. And I remember one time with working with this one Indigenous community, I said, I want to just be respectful. And they said, but that's the great thing, is when you communicate these things, that's all we're asking for, is for you to communicate. And I felt such freedom to then be like, okay, to just communicate. And it's amazing how just going back to that simple act of communicating, listening first and trying to understand, and then being able to speak from your heart back, it's amazing what that does. And so I love living here in British Columbia and working with the communities. And to me, I feel like we owe it to them to respect them, to honor them, come alongside them.
Yeah, you know what? I work with a few Indigenous clients as well. It's a really fortunate experience, isn't it? And it is the actually the time I think when I'm listening the most, because there's so much to learn.
Mm-hmm.
To be frank, just a lot of just lack of information that I don't have and should have. And I feel like when I'm working with an Indigenous client or an Indigenous colleague, I am constantly asking questions. And as per what you said, that was a piece of advice I received from a friend of mine here in BC, from Musqueam Nation, is just ask the questions, ask the questions. So sometimes even when in my mind I'm thinking this sounds like a stupid question, but I've got to ask it because I don't want to, and it's good for me to know. So I just ask, almost to the point where, I'm servicing a client with what I know, but at the same time, I'm getting so much value from that, right?
Yeah.
And it's learning so much.
Yeah.
So
No, I agree with you. And I keep hearing my daughter's voices in my head when I'm in those situations, just saying, just ask, like show humility and ask, and even like be okay to apologize and to learn and to be respectful. And I think those things, you're right. Like I feel really blessed that they have also compassion back, because I think that that's one thing, is understanding who they are and their history and this, and it's one thing to get people to say, oh, I'm listening. And it's another to actually actively listen. And so there's a big difference, a really, really big difference. And I want to build real relationships, like real relationships that last, and they change the course of history.
there's a lot of I think you would make for a great interview, Matt. A lot of sound, what media would call sound bites. And that by that, I mean things that people remember. You know what I mean by that? Things, very impactful pieces about your approach to kind of human communications. It's very
Oh, I
interesting.
appreciate that.
Any thoughts on the next frontier in the marketing space? So anything that you're keen to learn more about? I know that AI, you've chatted about that a little bit, and it's, all over everyone's,
Yeah.
discussion, to the point of, a little bit overabundance, although it's incredibly important. What are you looking to learn more about that you think is going to be impactful in the years to come in marketing?
Everything and anything. So I will say that, it's true. Like, AI is being talked about like crazy. And what it made me do was ask the question, why? Why is it being talked about? Why is it all of a sudden this brand new shiny tool that AI has been around since the 80s? So, but OpenAI has been around not for very long. So what is it about that tool in itself that everybody is just talking about? And it's interesting because a lot of times I heard someone say it, almost talking about AI has become very vanilla, where it's just everybody is talking about it, but nobody really knows what they're talking about when it comes to AI. And I think,
Yeah.
to me, I use AI every single day. And I've found that it's added so much value to my life as an assistant, as a tool that I can use as an assistant, but not a replacement. And so I am, as I mentioned, a naturally curious person. So I spend a lot of time researching. I spend a lot of time on Reddit. I love reaching out to looking at what agencies around the world are doing, understanding that Canada a lot of times is a little bit behind on what's going on with social media platforms, with algorithm changes, with all these things. Being curious and asking questions in a platform like Reddit, where I'm able to find out what's going on in Europe, what's going on in Asia, what's going on in different parts of the world, and those things are going to be coming. It allows me then to be able to utilize tools like AI to spot patterns, but then also interpret human emotions like tone, intent, and be able to take AI and deep empathetic listening to create this powerful connection. So with AI telling us, and they love to tell us what's trending, like empathetic Empathetic listening, what I'm talking about, tells you why it matters. And that's a big difference between those two. So to me, the future isn't, like, to answer your question about the next frontier in marketing, it's not about more content. It's about better, more meaningful content. And personalization, community-driven marketing, things like that, that are trust building, that's going to be the key. And I think that brands that listen are going to rise to the top.
What would you say, and I'm sorry to put you on the spot on this, but what would you say is your strongest tool for listening when it comes to what you're describing as these, micro communities, micro segmented audiences? What is your kind of tool that you would use the most? Would it be, watching them engaging online, or how would you do that?
I think, first of all, just being kind to yourself and starting, making the time to actually do it. Social listening tools are great, but they usually talk about, we're waiting for people to talk about us and then reacting, which again is kind of a weird, arrogant way of doing things. Like, okay, you guys go talk about me. Once you do talk about me, then I'll start responding to try to build this relationship. So that's a great question that you're asking. And what it looks like to me is, like, I'll spend even just 5 to 10 minutes looking at, say, a competitor and looking at their community. And again, though, knowing my target audience, and again, those micro target audiences, I'll go seek out that micro target audience, look at what they're engaging or what they're not, and then maybe ask the question why. And then if I've prompted AI and said, this is micro target audiences, everything about them, everything we've talked about, from psychographics to neuroscience to history to just getting to know who they are, not just how much money they make and where they live, I'm able to plunk it in and say, listen, I was hearing these things, right? They're not really engaging. And this post is about this. Is there something that I'm missing? Is there a bias? Like, do I have a bias towards this that I'm missing? And then see what AI helps me to, because, like, I do think a lot of people are disconnected from even true listening just as a human being. So one of the things that, I was talking to my wife, we were sitting down the other night having wine. I was talking to her, I said, a lot of people don't even realize too that AI that we're using was written by human beings. The coding was written by humans. So what if those human beings were using these social listening tools? What if they don't know how to listen in real life? So now they're making social listening tools based off what they think is appropriate listening. So you would be doing a disservice to your community to not physically make the time to go spend it listening as you, as a human, how you see it on behalf of your brand or your business that you're representing. And most importantly, the actual audience that you're trying to engage with. It just got me thinking that, yes, daily I will go look at things with our clients that we work with and go on social. My social feeds are really boring because they're just filled full of our client stuff, but I do it on purpose because I feel like we owe it to them just to make sure that we're connecting in a way that's real, it's authentic, we're building that real relationship, especially because we want people to not just buy once, we want them to choose the business and the brands that we work with for life.
Loyalty.
Yes.
When it comes to when you're not listening and being the chief of listening, outside of your work in marketing, what kinds of things kind of do you do to bring balance to your life and kind of really recharge, rest, and also kind of inspire your return to kind of what you love doing? How are you spending your time outside of work?
Easiest thing is my daughters and my wife. That's medicine. They heal me in every single way. They remind me why listening matters, why staying curious. Daily, it's interesting. I dropped off my girls this morning, and every single day that they have gone to school, that we have walked into the door, we said, okay, sweetheart, like, girls, what are you going to practice today? And they're like, we're going to practice bravery, courageousness, curiosity, and we'll try our best to have fun. And it's amazing how when I hear them say it, they are brave. They are courageous already. They are curious. This is things that are just in them, but they're choosing to actively then live these things out. And it inspires me every day how when I act those things out and I lead with empathy, there's so many magical things that end up inspiring me. And so it's amazing how I'll go for a walk, and I sometimes joke and I'll say that, like, my best friends are 100-foot cedar trees, and how I'll be inspired about something with a client, but I'm out walking in nature, and it's because of the way that you approach things. And I realize that, yeah, my girls are everything to me. Absolutely everything. I would give up everything I do in a second to be home with them full time, but my wife is unbelievable. And so part of our team, we're a team as a family, and part of my role then is to support that team by going to work and doing those things. But man, like, I cannot wait every day to be able to see them and just to spend time around them. It's not, I love them just for breathing air. It has nothing to do with what they do or they don't do for me. It's about them knowing that I love them for breathing air and that they add value to this world just being around them. And so I can't thank them. Like, literally, that is what helps me balance, because they have free reign to call me on anything. Sometimes even when I've been doing podcasts, they're sitting down at my feet and they'll question me on things. So I also know too that they're my level of I will and cannot embellish things because they will call me on it, and I don't want them to live that way, and they know I don't want to live that way. And so yeah, I am absolutely in love with them, and I feel honored to share life with them.
That's amazing. Yeah, it's beautiful how kids can really point out. My son once said to me, "Why are you talking like that?" when he saw me on a Zoom call, because
Yeah.
it wasn't naturally how I talk.
Yeah.
And I realized like I was really kind of, putting on some type of a role. I don't know. I can't remember for the life of me who I was speaking with or how I was speaking, but he just thought it was bizarre. He thought I was acting in a way. And it really made me examine what I was doing.
It's so wise. My girls have done the same. It's funny, they were mentioning about how, like, same thing. It's like answering a phone. They're like, "Why are you talking like that?"
Yeah.
And it makes me pause and go, "Wait, why am I?" And just asking that question, like, it's amazing how it lightens that load. We're like, I don't actually have to do that. Like, the same person that I am with you right now is the same person I am with everyone that works at our agency, who are unbelievable humans, which is the same person I am with our clients, which is the same person I am with my daughters. Like, I don't have the capacity, nor do I want the capacity to be anything else. I just want to be who I am. And that's one thing that I feel I love that they ask is, why are you talking like that? Just a simple question like that. You're like, oh man, thank you for the reminder.
Yeah. Yeah. The wisdom of children. Matt, I end every conversation with asking about my guests' favorite nonprofits. I love to learn about new ones and share about ones that guests are passionate about. Are there a couple that you would like to share today?
I have a whole list, but I'll share a couple for sure. Because our lives were changed before we had kids by getting the opportunity, the absolute blessing to rescue a Cane Corso puppy from the SPCA here in BC.
Yeah.
And so we fell in love with the SPCA. They're phenomenal. And we lost that puppy years ago and forever wanted to get another puppy. And just 6 weeks ago, we had the absolute honor of rescuing another Cane Corso puppy through the SPCA. And they are unbelievable. They have been phenomenal throughout this entire thing. And our family is a lover of all things fin, feather, and furs. And just being able to have a puppy, she was actually going to be sitting beside me in the podcast, but she snores way too loud. So she's sleeping upstairs. And then the other one is the BC Cancer Foundation. I mean, I can't say enough amazing things about who they are. We've had the pleasure of working with them for years, supporting them, being able to do things and introduce our children to them and the impact of that. And I think that that's something that I feel very honored to live in British Columbia and to have something like the BC Cancer Foundation that is there for just, yeah, their impact is absolutely massive. And I'm honored to have them. And then honestly, any other organization, because I can't say all of them, but would any other organization that helps people go from just surviving to truly living, man.
Okay. I like that. And I'll make sure to link to the SPCA and BC Cancer Foundation below the episode. A great nonprofit. I'm familiar with both. It's been a really great conversation. I think listeners are going to take a lot from this, whether you're leading a marketing team, whether you're a very small marketing team or a large corporation. I think Matt Borck, partner and chief listening officer at the One Group Agency, has a lot to offer, and I think he will have you thinking about your approach to your marketing, your engagement, and your connections. Thank you so much, Matt, for joining me today. I appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute honor.
Thank you so much.
Be kind and truly connect. You're listening to the Rachel Thexton Connects.